In this demo, we're going to see how to use adaptive cards in a custom task module within a custom Microsoft Teams app. And we're also going to learn how to invoke task modules from anywhere within Microsoft Teams using deep links. Now, the demo that I'm going to show you here, it expects or assumes that you've already gone through the previous demo in this module, where we created a Microsoft Teams app project with the Yeoman generator that contains a personal tab, as you can see here on the screen, that also includes calls to launch these existing task modules. Now, my web server isn't running, that's why we're seeing that error there, but we'll go ahead and update that, have that resolved in just a few minutes. So in this first section, we're going to create an adaptive card that mirrors the functionality of the video selector task module that we created in the previous demo. Adaptive cards are defined using JSON that can be written by hand or using Microsoft Teams, the App Studio app. So within Microsoft Teams, I'm going to go ahead and open up the More Apps dialog and select App Studio. So within App Studio, I'm going to come over here to the card editor and I'm going to create a brand new card. So I'm going to create an adaptive card we see down here at the bottom. Now, the adaptive card editor inside of App Studio, it shows it's a default card and a live preview that you can see here on the right hand side. And we can use this interface to design your card and see how it's going to be rendered. So from the JSON tab that you see here, I'm going to go ahead and replace all the contents of this tab, of this card, with the following card. This JSON is going to instruct Microsoft Teams to render a text box. So we should have a text box right here. And a button. You can see our button. So when the button is selected, it's going to submit the card. So what I'm going to do is let's just grab the contents of this card, go back over to our project, and inside of our subfolder where we're putting everything else, I'm going to create a YouTube selector card.json file and save that in. Now, after creating the adaptive card, the next step is to create a task module that is going to display and handle the submission actions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate our existing tab that we see right here. And in the return statement for our button, I'm going to go ahead where we can see our existing button of show video. I'm going to add in a new button to the end of our existing one. All right, so there we go. So what this button does, it has different content, but you can see here that when I click it, it's going to launch a different method. So let's go ahead and let's implement that method. So I'll come up here a little bit above my project and go ahead and implement that method of change adapter card. So notice what this code is doing is this is creating a task module info object. It's got a submit handler that's being passed in as well. So the first step is to load the adaptive card and set the value of the video ID to display when it loads. So I'm going to do this by adding a little bit more code to the top of this handler here. So we'll go ahead and add in a little bit more code. All right, so what this does is this is going to load our adaptive card, and then it's going to walk through the adaptive card and find in the JSON, and it's going to find an item with the ID of YouTube video ID and swap that out with the value from our state. Now let's implement the callback. So in the callback, this is what's going to handle the submit action. And it's going to send an object with all the input objects as properties back to the tab. So I'm going to find our submit handler that you see right here. And I'm going to go ahead and add in the following code. So what this does is this is going to set the video ID, or it's going to call our state setter using the React hooks that we've set up previously to set the video ID equal to the result object that comes back from the adaptive card, and it's going to reference the YouTube video ID ID of the actual object. Now, the last thing to do is I need to add a card property to our task module info object. So I'm going to say card, and this is going to be our adaptive card. So now that the task module info isn't going to be pointing to, as you can see previously, we were pointing to the URL of where our tab was implemented. Now we're pointing to an adaptive card, which is what we loaded right here, and then initialized it with some values. So let's go ahead and test this. I'm going to spin up my ngrok web server again, or my ngrok exposed web server. And now that it's running, let's go ahead and launch the browser. And we'll go back to our tab. There we go. We have our third button that you see right here. I'll go ahead and select it. And we can see now that this is being rendered using our adaptive card instead of using the HTML player that we saw, or the HTML tab that we saw earlier. So here I can even make a change to the video that we want to display. I can do that. I'll just update this value right here, and we'll see the video in the background actually change. And sure enough, we did. We can see the video actually change in the background. Now, task modules can be invoked by selecting a button in the Microsoft Teams experience or by using a deep link. So deep links allow us to trigger a task module invocation from outside of Microsoft Teams or within Teams in a conversation. So consider if you wanted to open a task module from a conversation that would display a video on, let's say we'll use this video that we have right now of the go-to guide for team owners on Microsoft Teams. So what we need to do is we need to craft the deep link URL. So there are a couple things we have to look at with this URL. So let me just show you what the URL would look like. We can see a bunch of values here that we need to update. We have the ID of the Microsoft Teams app, the URL that we want to load for the task module, and then how big it is, as well as the title for it. So what we're also going to want to change the URL of the task module itself. So for example, as we learned about in the previous demo, our task module is going to be loaded with something, as you can see here. So we'll have our invoke URL, the YouTube player ID, there's the video right there, and the player that's being passed in. So the deep link that we want to launch our video could be something similar to what you see right here. So let's make this a little bit easier to read. What you can see here is that we have the ID of our Teams app in that GUID. The URL that we want to load is our invoke URL to our tab itself with the video ID on the end of the URL. The dimensions of 700 by 1000 and the title of the player that we want to use as well. So let's go make sure that these values are the same as our application. So let's come back over to our project. And if I go to our environment property, we'll have our application ID. So there's our app right there. So that was being set, and we know that's being set inside of the manifest. If I go look at the actual manifest file that's being generated, you can see that the ID is being set from the application ID environment variable. So if I go grab that, we'll replace this GUID. You see here, our invoke URL is invoke.io. YouTube player ID, and the video that we wanted to display is that we got that from our URL. Let's grab this video. Where is it? Right there. And the video that we were going to display, there's the title of our YouTube player. So let's grab, that's the title of our video. So let's come back over here and see what the title of this video was again. It was Go-To Guide for Team Owners on Microsoft Teams. So Go-To Guide for Team Owners on Microsoft Teams. And what we need to do is we need to make this friendly for the URL. So I'll do a %20 to implement the space, and then we can just paste that in. So now I can grab that URL. Now let's go back to Microsoft Teams, and I will go into our test team, and in the general channel, let's create a new conversation, and I'll say feedback requested. We just published a new video. Can you take a look and let us know what you think? We'll say video to review. I'll select all of that. We'll go ahead and open this up in the rich client, and we will create a hyperlink, and I'll paste in that link. Make sure that's everything. It is. Say insert, and then I'll go ahead and send that to our team. And now let's see if it launches the video, or the task module. So I'll select it, and sure enough, you can see now that we're using a deep link to launch the task module. So in this demo, you learned how to use adaptive cards in a custom task module, in a custom Teams app, and you also learn how to invoke task modules from anywhere within Microsoft Teams using deep links.